False pages. Uncover hidden history and untold truths.
On the morning of June 28, 1914, a 19-year-old named Gavrilo Princip walked into a delicatessen in Sarajevo to buy a sandwich. He had already failed his mission that morning. The assassination attempt was over. The target had survived. Princip was hungry, defeated, and had no idea what to do next. Then, by a coincidence so absurd it seems impossible, the car carrying his target took a wrong turn and stopped directly in front of the delicatessen where Princip was standing. He walked outside, he raised his pistol, and in the next 30 seconds he started a war that killed 17 million people. But here's what your history class never told you about that moment. Princip didn't start World War I, the wrong turn did. And the wrong turn only happened because of a series of catastrophic mistakes, miscommunications, and strokes of impossible bad luck that had been building since early that morning. Remove any single one of those mistakes and the war doesn't happen. At least not that day. At least not that way. This is the story of the most consequential series of accidents in human history. Let's go back to the beginning of that morning. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, was visiting Sarajevo on what was, by any reasonable assessment, an extraordinarily bad day to be there. June 28th was Serbian National Day, a day of intense nationalist feeling in a city full of people who deeply resented Austro-Hungarian rule. His security detail had received credible warnings of assassination plots. Several people had advised him not to make the visit. He went anyway. The motorcade set off through Sarajevo's streets in a procession of open-topped cars. Lining the route were thousands of spectators and 7 members of a nationalist group called the Black Hand, each armed with a pistol or a grenade, each stationed at a different point along the route with orders to kill the Archduke. 7 assassins, 1 target. It should have been impossible to fail. The first assassin lost his nerve and did nothing as the car passed. The second threw a grenade, but it bounced off the folded-back convertible roof of the Archduke's car and exploded under the following vehicle, wounding several people in the next car. Franz Ferdinand was unhurt. The driver accelerated, the motorcade sped away. The remaining 5 assassins, confused and leaderless, scattered into the crowd. By 10:15 in the morning, the assassination attempt was over. It had failed completely. Franz Ferdinand arrived at the town hall, furious but alive. He gave his speech. He then made a decision that would change the course of history. He wanted to visit the people who had been wounded in the grenade explosion at the hospital. His motorcade set off again, and here is where the catastrophe truly begins. Nobody told the lead driver about the route change. The original route was supposed to go straight along the main road. The new route to take the Archduke to the hospital required turning right at a specific intersection. The lead driver, following his original instructions, turned left instead. The Archduke's security chief, realizing the mistake, shouted at the driver to stop and reverse. The driver hit the brakes. The car stalled. They had stopped directly in front of Schiller's delicatessen. Gavrilo Princip, who had been standing inside eating his sandwich and contemplating the failure of the entire operation, walked outside and found himself 5 feet from the Archduke of Austria-Hungary, sitting in a stationary open-topped car with no crowd between them. He fired twice. The Archduke was hit in the jugular vein. His wife Sophie, sitting beside him, was hit in the abdomen. Both died within the hour. Now here's where the story becomes something far larger than a single assassination. Because what happened next had almost nothing to do with Princip, or the Black Hand, or even Serbia. What happened next was about a continent that had been building toward war for decades, and needed only the smallest spark to ignite. Europe in 1914 was sitting on a powder keg. The great powers, Austria-Hungary, Germany, Russia, France, and Britain, had spent the previous 40 years building massive armies, signing secret alliances, and developing elaborate war plans that assumed conflict was inevitable. They had created a system so tightly wound that once it started moving, nobody could stop it. Austria-Hungary blamed Serbia for the assassination, with some justification, since the Black Hand had ties to Serbian military intelligence. They issued Serbia an ultimatum with deliberately impossible conditions, designed to be rejected. Serbia accepted almost every condition. Austria-Hungary declared war anyway. Russia, bound by alliance to Serbia, began mobilizing its army. Germany, bound by alliance to Austria-Hungary, declared war on Russia. France, bound by alliance to Russia, was next. Germany invaded Belgium to reach France. Britain, bound by treaty to protect Belgian neutrality, declared war on Germany. In 37 days, a wrong turn in Sarajevo had become the First World War. And here's the detail that I can't stop thinking about. Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany, watching the war declarations cascade across Europe in those final days of July 1914, reportedly turned to his military chief of staff and said he wanted to stop, to halt the mobilization and find a diplomatic solution. His chief of staff told him it was impossible. The war machine had been set in motion. The trains carrying millions of soldiers were already running on fixed schedules. Stopping them would cause chaos that would take weeks to untangle. The mobilization plan had been developed over years and could not simply be paused. The most powerful man in Germany looked at the machinery his country had built and realized he could no longer control it. 17 million people died in the war that followed. 20 million more were wounded. The map of Europe was redrawn. 4 empires, the Austro-Hungarian, the Ottoman, the Russian, and the German, ceased to exist. The instability left behind directly caused the Second World War, the Holocaust, and conflicts that are still unresolved today. All of it traceable through a chain of accidents and alliances to a driver who took a wrong turn. But here's the question that historians have been arguing about for over a century, and that I want you to sit with. Was World War I inevitable? If Princip had missed, if the driver had turned right, if Franz Ferdinand had simply stayed home that morning, would the war have happened anyway, just later, just differently? Or was the entire catastrophe dependent on that one wrong turn on a summer morning in Sarajevo? Because if the answer is yes, if 17 million deaths hung on a single navigational error, then what does that tell us about how fragile the systems we build actually are, and how close we are, at any given moment, to our own wrong turn? Leave your answer in the comments. Subscribe to False Pages because the history you were taught was missing something, and we're going to find it.